Our next speaker is Mark Skidmore, Professor of Economics and Agricultural Food and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. Dr. Skidmore holds the Morris Chair in State and Local Government Finance and Policy at Michigan State and is a distinguished scholar at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. He's also served as director of the USDA-funded North Central Regional Center for Rural Development from 2016 to 2020 and as co-editor of the Journal of Urban Affairs from 2011 to 2021. Professor Skidmore's research covers topics in urban regional economics, public finance and policy, disasters and health, including COVID-19. He's published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and edited 3 books. He's received more than $10 million in grant funding from the National Science Foundation, Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Agriculture, among other organizations. In recent years, Professor Skidmore has published 3 articles relating to COVID-19, one of which examined the potential scale of COVID-19 vaccine adverse events. That 2023 article, originally published in the BMC Infectious Diseases, indicated that those who observed adverse events among family and friends were much less likely to be inoculated. The evaluation also indicated that as many as 278,000 people may have died from the COVID vaccine in the first year of its rollout. The article was improperly retracted, taking Dr. Skidmore on a journey into the world of weaponized retractions. Please welcome Dr. Skidmore.
Thank you, Justin. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here with you. And Chris, I couldn't help but smile at some of your illustrations of these things, and you think to yourself, how could a legitimate scientist just go along with these frameworks that are put before us? And I think that's an important question to ask. But we do live in an ecosystem where there's this built-in self-monitoring, and of course we know that capture is a part of all of that. If you can imagine, any culture has something that we define as reality. Some of reality is true, and some of our reality is not true. And a lot of what is not true is curated through capture. We have lots of things that people believe are true that just aren't true, and it's sometimes very difficult to sort through all of that. So that capture spans not just government entities, but business, media, social media, universities potentially, scientific journals, all the way down to individuals. At the university level, 55% of funding comes from federal government organizations for R&D. Increasingly, they rely on public-private partnerships and reliance on foundations. And all of these entities have their vested interest. And some of them, you could argue, are captured. And so that trickles down to the university and on down to the researcher. And so the researcher is faced with this struggle because they know the costs and benefits, and do I do something over here that might be useful or maybe not useful, but it's funded, or do I do something that's risky and maybe not funded? And so people tend to move. I think the most common thing that happens at the university is that important topics don't get studied, and we don't know how big a loss that is to society. Because sometimes, as we'll discuss today, we have fraudulent research that may appear, or we might not report unwelcome findings because the funder doesn't go along with what the funder says, as so nicely illustrated in the new movie, An Inconvenient Truth. Scientific journals and editors also have pressures and may have conflicts of interest. I think most suppression occurs at the editor's desk. If the editor is risk averse, they'll just desk reject the controversial stuff. So most of that stuff happens there. Every once in a while, an article will get through, and it might get improperly retracted, which I'm going to talk about in my case. To illustrate some of the complications and interrelatedness of organizations, let me talk about the journal BMC Infectious Diseases. That was the journal that published my article and then retracted it. It is published under a family of journals managed by BMC, which in turn it falls under Springer Nature. Springer Nature is in turn controlled by Holtzbrink Publishing Group, which is a partner of the World Economic Forum. Albert Bourla and Bill Gates are prominent influencers and regularly attend those events. So you can see all the linkages through there. And so that's a challenge for us all. I want to spend the remainder of my time just giving a concrete illustration of how a retraction works and how it appears to be coordinated. I'm going to give you a timeline of what happened to me with key events, and they seem to be coordinated, but I don't know. I'll leave it to you to be the judge. On January 24th of 23, my article was published, and it went viral on social media. On January 27th, the journal editor contacts me and says they're going to conduct a re-review of the article. On February 21st, it was alleged that I had engaged in ethical misconduct. My University Institutional Review Board then has to conduct an investigation, whether they want to or not, right? It's their job. On February 28th, my university lifts the COVID vaccine mandate, and I wonder if the revelation of my study had anything to do with that. They were one of the first universities to lift the mandate, and it was months before the federal public health emergency was lifted by the government. On March 30th, my university announced that Anthony Fauci would receive an honorary doctorate and serve as graduation keynote speaker. On April 11th, the journal formally retracts the article, and on April 12th, my Wikipedia page was revamped to indicate the retraction and make a note that I'm anti-vax. And at this point, I hadn't really even looked at the other vaccines. I knew very little about it. In early April, the Chronicle of Higher Education and the LA Times wrote hit pieces about the article, but I think it's also important to put into question the integrity of the researcher as well. So that was all happening at the same time. On May 5th, Dr. Fauci receives his honorary doctorate, and I was in attendance, and as I recall, he included in his speech a warning about COVID misinformation. On September 13th, the Institutional Review Board at my university determined that I had not violated any ethical standards. No updates in the media about that, though. And then in October, after another round of peer review, the article was republished in the journal Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law. So, I won't tell you that it wasn't stressful. It was stressful for me and my family. But I have to say, I don't think I lost a lot of sleep over it because I felt like I was just doing what I'm supposed to do. My job is to ask a question I think is important and then try to shed light on it. I never indicated that it was the answer to the work, but indicated it was a signal and it called for more research. We know that there's a lack of transparency and there are conflicts of interest in many arenas, and it's our job to continue to do what we can to eliminate those. But I think it's difficult to distinguish who the really bad actors are. Sometimes you can clearly say who they are and sometimes not. But there are a lot of people who are also just influenced by propaganda. We all live in this environment, and it's a challenge. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote in the Gulag Archipelago, "To do evil, a human being must first of all believe that what he is doing is good, or else it's a well-considered act of conformity with natural law." I think this is true. Otherwise, who would purposely administer a toxic COVID shot? Who would give a sick patient a toxic drug like remdesivir? Who would withhold effective COVID treatments if they didn't think they were trying to do the right thing? And then I'll close with another quote by one of my favorite Russian authors, Fyodor Dostoevsky. "Nothing in this world is harder than speaking the truth." That's why it's such an honor to be here with all of you, because there are so many people trying to do that. Thank you. At a tremendous cost, I might add.